For decades, Americans believed a comforting lie. They believed that organized crime in the United States was small, fragmented, local, and mostly exaggerated by newspapers and Hollywood. The idea of a secret criminal government operating across the country sounded foreign, un-American, almost conspiratorial. Even the director of the FBI insisted it was nothing more than folklore. And while the public slept peacefully under that illusion, an invisible empire was thriving, collecting billions, controlling ports, unions, industries, and political offices, enforcing its will not through laws, but through fear. The American Mafia did not rule from hidden castles or underground bunkers. It ruled from restaurants, barbershops, union halls, and hotel lobbies. It ruled quietly, and for a long time, it ruled uncontested. On the morning of October 25th, 1957, Albert Anastasia walked into the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan and took a seat in a barbershop chair. To strangers, he was just another middle-aged man getting a trim. To those who knew him, he was terror incarnate. Anastasia was not a strategist or a politician, he was an executioner. A founding figure of Murder Inc., the enforcement arm of the Mafia, he had ordered and overseen countless killings. He was known for sudden rages, public threats, and an absolute intolerance for betrayal. When he sat back in that chair, he believed he was untouchable. Seconds later, two masked men entered. Shots exploded through the room. Anastasia tried to rise, slipping on the floor, staring at his own distorted reflection as bullets tore into him. When it ended, one of the most feared men in America lay bleeding in public, dead in a luxury hotel. This was not just a murder, it was a message. The assassination of Albert Anastasia shattered a fragile balance that had kept the Mafia stable for decades. That balance had been engineered years earlier by men like Lucky Luciano, who understood that violence was bad for business. Under his vision, disputes were settled by committees instead of gunfire. Power was shared. Rules mattered. But by the late 1950s, ambition had returned. Vito Genovese, a man defined by envy and hunger for dominance, believed the time had come to crown himself king. With Anastasia dead and Frank Costello neutralized after a failed assassination attempt, Genovese saw no rivals left. He wanted legitimacy, he wanted recognition, and he wanted the entire American underworld to fall in line. To do that, he made a catastrophic decision. He agreed to a massive gathering of Mafia leadership, a meeting so bold, so arrogant, that it violated the very principles that had kept the organization hidden. In November 1957, crime bosses from New York, Chicago, Florida, Ohio, and beyond began traveling to a quiet rural town called Apalachin, New York. This was not a city accustomed to power or secrecy. It was farmland, it was silence. And suddenly, it was filled with luxury cars bearing license plates from across the nation. Men in expensive suits arrived at a private estate owned by Joseph Barbara, a known underworld figure who had carefully cultivated the appearance of a respectable businessman. Inside that estate, history was unfolding. Nearly 100 of the most powerful criminals in North America were gathered in one place. They discussed territory, leadership, money, and revenge. They believed they were invisible. They believed the government was blind. They believed their myth protected them. But outside, something small and unplanned was happening. Something that would bring the entire illusion crashing down. A state trooper noticed the cars. He noticed the plates. He noticed that none of this belonged in a town like Apalachin. Acting on instinct rather than orders, police set up roadblocks. When word reached the house, panic spread faster than discipline. And then the unthinkable happened. These men who commanded absolute obedience, men who decided life and death with a nod, ran. They abandoned their cars. They fled into open fields. They crashed through wet woods and handmade Italian shoes, soaked, humiliated, desperate to disappear. Some were caught hiding in bushes. Others slipped in the mud. One of the most powerful crime syndicates in history collapsed into chaos in a matter of minutes. By nightfall, dozens of mafia leaders were detained. Names that had circulated in whispers for decades were now recorded, photographed, and reported. The next morning, newspapers across the country exploded with headlines. The mafia was real, it was organized, and it had just been exposed by accident. The event became known as the Apalachin Meeting, and it marked the end of an era. But perhaps more importantly, it marked the beginning of public ridicule. Power built on fear cannot survive mockery. And Apalachin turned fear into laughter. For the FBI, Apalachin was a humiliation. J. Edgar Hoover had spent years denying the existence of a national criminal organization. His focus had been elsewhere: communists, subversion, control. Now his position was indefensible. Under pressure, the Bureau quietly began tracking mafia figures more aggressively. But even then, the damage was slow to repair. The mafia still operated. The code of silence still held, until one man decided it no longer would. Joseph Valachi was not a boss. He was not powerful. He was a foot soldier, a man who had spent his life following orders, enforcing rules, and surviving by obedience. In prison, sharing space with Vito Genovese himself, Valachi became convinced that his boss wanted him dead. When the kiss of death came, loyalty meant nothing. Survival did. In 1963, Valachi did what no mafia member had ever done publicly. He spoke. Televised across America, Valachi described the mafia from the inside. He named families. He explained hierarchy. He revealed rituals, language, and structure. He confirmed the existence of what members called Cosa Nostra, our thing. For the first time, Americans were not hearing rumors. They were hearing testimony. The effect was seismic. Laws changed. Surveillance expanded. Prosecutors gained new weapons. The era of untouchable bosses was ending. The mafia would continue to exist, but it would never again be invisible. Apalachin had stripped away its secrecy. Valachi had destroyed its silence. What followed was not a single collapse, but a slow, grinding dismantling of an empire that had believed itself eternal. And that is the final irony. The American Mafia did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it became too confident, too visible, and too convinced that fear alone could protect it. In the end, it wasn't firepower that defeated it, but exposure.